The week after her 21st wedding anniversary, Lisette Johnson told her husband their marriage was over. She'd endured years of verbal abuse and occasional outbreaks of violence, but nothing could have prepared her for what followed. One weekend in October 2009, Lisette's husband walked into the bedroom of their home in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States, and shot her 3 times before turning the gun on himself. Lisette is lucky to be alive. She now uses her terrible experience to help other women who are victims of domestic violence. I asked her to tell me what had attracted her to her husband in the first place.
He was delightful. He was very charismatic. Everyone liked him. Had a great sense of humor, very social, very well connected throughout the community. Just a charming person to be around.
And were there any warning signs at all in the early part of your relationship that it was going to turn out in such a tragic way?
There were warning signs that all was not well, that it was maybe not a healthy relationship. He was very demeaning, very berating. Character assassinations were quite regular. And it was cyclical. So we would have these periods where we were very much in love and things were going fine, and he would then, for a reason I did not know, begin to berate me, use very descriptive terms, and, I was not a good business person. I'd owned a business, and he said, I was going to run it into the ground. So a lot of psychological abuse, too.
And what effect was all that having on you when he was doing this? It must have been very dispiriting. It must have made you feel very depressed, didn't it?
I was. I actually, towards the end of the relationship, was in a very severe depression. And that is actually what motivated me to make some changes in my life. What was going on was, although it was just verbal, was etching away at me and really whittling me down. There were a few physical incidents where I had threatened to call the police.
What sort of physical incidents?
We'd had a very minor disagreement by normal standards. And as I left the room, he followed me and he trapped me in the bathroom, and it escalated to him trying to strangle me. And
you threatened him with the police?
I clawed my way free. And when I was able to get out of the room, I did dial the police, and he said, "No one will believe you. You can call them, but no one will believe you." And I truly believed him, that no one would believe me, because there was this community who saw him in an entirely different light than my children and I experienced him during these cycles.
And what were the events leading up to the tragic ending of your relationship?
I had told my husband that I was quite unhappy and that I did want to leave. We had some disagreements on who was going to move out. I had finally gotten to the point where, and he had threatened that, having been depressed and having had a psychiatric record in that I had gotten therapy, that I would never see my children again. And my attorney confirmed that they could actually bring up a psychiatric record in court and keep him from seeing the children.
That's a kind of nightmarish scenario, isn't it? I mean, you must have felt incredibly trapped by that.
I felt there was no way out. But I was also determined to take one step at a time, and I decided I would have to leave without the children and go back for them and fight for them on the other side of things. The weekend that had happened, he had started stalking me, following me everywhere, making sure I saw him. It did ramp up to some sexual violence, and at which point I had contacted my doctor and my attorney. And my husband, the last 48 hours, assumed a very calm demeanor, extraordinarily calm. He did not lose his mind. He did not go mad. He did not have a break from reality. I think at that point he knew exactly what he was going to do.
And did you have any kind of sense of foreboding, of impending doom?
The night before, we had a birthday party for my son to celebrate his 10th birthday. And we'd had some children over the house. We sat by a bonfire under a brilliant full moon, and I had a sense of foreboding. I had a sense that my life was going to change forever. The morning of the afternoon it happened, he was to have gone to stay with his sister, and I was going to church. The children were staying home. When I got home from church, she was still there. And I asked him, what's going on? How are you feeling? And he said, you know how I feel. And I went into, we had not slept in the same room. I went into the master bedroom and sat in a chair in the corner and looked at some emails. I had changed my clothes to get ready to meet a friend to walk. And he came into the room a few times and had a couple of conversations, please hug me. Please lay with me. And I said, this is over. This part of our relationship is over. And I fairly dismissed it. And he had said, please hug me one last time. And I didn't pick up on that. When he came back into the room the last time, it looked like a child with a play gun with their fingers. But I knew immediately. And I stood up immediately as he was shooting me. He had aimed for my head. He hit my chest between my collarbone and my right breast, and then shot me a few more times as I had to run by him to get out the door.
And what was going through your mind as that was happening? Were you in a terrible panic?
I was in survival mode. I just knew I had to get out. And it was a final moment of breaking free, and I had to choose me over him. If I had stayed, I would have been dead.
What about the children? They heard what was happening?
When I saw the gun, I screamed out his name. The gunshots, the first one rang out. As I was running outside, I told the children, call 911, which is our emergency. Call 911 and get out of the house. Get out of the house. Get out of the house. They, of course, are children. They did not get out of the house. My daughter apparently sent my son out, and she came up to see what was happening. I was, by that time, outside and running away from the house. He was still shooting. I don't know exactly what happened after that.
So you must have been in a terrible physical state as well as a mental state. You've been shot several times.
I'd been shot several times. Both my lungs were collapsed. I don't know how I ran, frankly. I think adrenaline and that survival instinct is very strong. To know that my children were still alive, which I found out in the ambulance, really kept me going.
It must have been incredibly traumatic for your daughter to have seen you in that state.
She still is challenged, suffering. She is unable to recall the incident. She, of course, loved her father very much, and to reconcile the end and to mourn him while understanding the cause of his death and the chaos and aftermath that our family has experienced. It's very difficult for her, and I think it will be a lifelong challenge. And for my son as well, to always have his birthday associated with something like this.
How did you find out that your husband had turned the gun on himself?
I finally asked one of the nurses caring for me, what has happened to my husband. Once I found out that my children were safe and had not been shot, I'd heard a final shot, and I knew to turn around, I may actually still be in danger, so I had to keep running and moving. And I finally collapsed in my neighbor's yard. But I tried to get as far away as I could. I heard the shot and I did not feel it. So I suspected that is what had happened.
And how are you now? Do you still have the physical after effects of those terrible injuries?
I have miraculously very few. I do have a bullet still in my liver. It was unsafe and life-threatening. I was very unstable during the initial surgery. They chose to leave it in. I almost bled out. And the surgeon at a follow-up visit said, we almost lost you. So it was too dangerous to take that out. They left that in. Damaged a little bit of my heart. Again, I had both lungs had collapsed. My diaphragm was shattered. But to this day, other than some extensive scarring, I am quite well.
And have you any explanation for his behaviour? Do you understand why he ended up like that?
He sought to destroy me, but he actually gave me an entirely new life that has a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose, in that I am now a domestic violence advocate in a volunteer role. I meet women and accompany them to the emergency room when they have been battered. And I hear their stories over and over and over. And the man is essentially the same man. It's almost a textbook character.
You were married to this man for 21 years. What are your feelings about him now?
Very mixed. I'm not sure that I actually knew the man I was married to. As I said, he was very charismatic.
But are you angry with him?
I cycle in and out of anger. I have gone through hurt and anger and disappointment. I feel like I'd rather channel my energy into positively using this towards the rest of my life in a way that can help other people and that will show my children the more positive aspects of relationships. To be hung up in anger is to have him own me, and he owned me long enough. I think he doesn't need any more space in my head or heart. I need to move on and not play the victim role, but be the survivor and pay it forward to someone else who's in that situation and really just can't see the way out and can't see their way clear.
Lisette Johnson speaking to me from Richmond, Virginia.